In his first medium-term budget policy statement, Minister of Finance Enoch Godongwana did not commit to the introduction of a basic income grant for millions of unemployed South Africans, at least not permanently. The minister stressed that South Africa is already spending 1.1 trillion rand on grants, while still battling a snowball effect in government debt of about 4 trillion rand. Godongwana said proposals to expand social grant support should be evaluated against pre-existing priorities for the government that remain underfunded, including basic services, education and healthcare. To talk more about this then, we're joined by the co-founder and senior policy specialist at the Institute for Economic Justice, that's Neil Coleman. Neil, always good to see you. Welcome to News at Prime. So this temporary grant for millions of unemployed South Africans is set to come to an end in March. The minister yesterday did not rule out the introduction of a permanent basic income grant. Are you still holding out hope?
I don't think hope is really what people are looking for. I think what we need from government are plans. We need commitments. We need engagement with the ideas. I've come on your show before, Timekile. You were just talking to me about that. We've come on, over the last year, civil society has put repeated proposals, or rather many different proposals, on pathways to the introduction of a basic income grant, and government is simply failing to engage us. What they've been doing is engaging technocrats who have been behind closed doors, talking to researchers about all manner of proposals, some of which are completely unimplementable. And we know for a fact that Treasury has been pushing full steam ahead to drive this proposal for a family grant to replace the COVID grant, which is currently benefiting 9.5 million people. And Treasury was suggesting, well, next year we can start by rolling out to 1 million families. The researchers who've looked at this say this is completely unimplementable, and we simply don't have infrastructure, but in any event, is a terrible idea on many, many grounds. So, hope needs to start with a change in approach by government, including a shift from the current macroeconomic stance, which is that they're doing everything to please the ratings agencies, so they think, and very little to please the people of this country. You'll remember that the minister himself, and I think I've discussed this with you before, counterposed the issue of jobs versus grants. But this budget needs anything meaningful on jobs, and it has nothing meaningful on grants. The presidential employment stimulus, like the COVID grant, they say they're only going to, look and see what's feasible next February. We can't wait till February for another crisis like the crisis we experienced earlier this year. Just to remind you, Timekile, the July looting that took place, part of which was fueled by desperation and hunger of people, cost the economy 50 billion. The minister announced yesterday that they have allocated a further over 40 billion to deal with the fallout. That means that nearly 100 billion has been destroyed or has been lost to the economy as a result of problematic policies. So this is very short-term thinking. A big mite that will cost a significant amount of money, but it multiplies its returns to society so massive when you think that it'll benefit over half of the population. So there's false economics at play here. And, one wonders what it's going to take to change the trajectory of economic thinking, particularly in our country, which is stuck in old paradigms.
So as things stand, Neil, we're looking at a number of options here, right? So the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, has basically said that we're likely to get more detail or finality on the issue of a basic income grant in the main budget speech. That's in February. This temporary relief expires in March. There's already an idea floating about for a family grant that will be given to people who are the head of a household. Are we likely to get an extension of the temporary relief while government tries to basically figure out which of the two options to go for?
If Treasury has its way, the COVID grant will be terminated in March next year. That's clear. It was terminated 3 times. You remember it was terminated in October last year, and then it was renewed after pressure from civil society till the beginning of this year, and then it was renewed to April and then terminated. And it was only because of the July looting that it was reinstated. And this is what we're saying, that you cannot wait for these crises to erupt in order to plan proactively for the fact that, nearly half our population is living in poverty currently. So it's very worrying. The minister has said that this is not his decision. This is government's decision as a collective. The reality is that Treasury technocrats are operating as a completely rogue department, pushing proposals like the one you mentioned, the family grant. And so we have written a letter to the president as the civil society organizations working on this issue to request urgently that government engages us on these issues, on a plan to extend the COVID grant, but then secondly, look at potential policy pathways to a basic income grant, because it can be designed in various ways. It's not going to happen next year, but it can happen in the medium term. And to do that, we have to have a discussion about how it's going to be designed, how it's going to be financed, who's going to benefit, what the level will be, and so on. But we believe the research has been done and the proposals are on the table. It's now time for government to engage for the end of this year. Because you must remember, Temekile, these budgets, are long-term processes. The February budget is already starting to be formulated. So the idea that come February they will consider and decide is actually ridiculous. A lot of these decisions are going to be taken in the next 6 weeks or so.
So, Neil, you've got, as you're saying, almost half the population currently receives some kind of social grant, about 27.8 million people, and this was acknowledged in the speech by the finance minister yesterday. When you look at the slow rate at which we're creating new jobs, the uncertainty around a permanent basic income grant, what do you think is the fate, the likely fate in the immediate term of the poorest among us in this country? Where will they turn to?
That's the question. It's the billion-dollar question, because unless there are concrete measures, to address, what that person is experiencing in Sekhukhune or in the Eastern Cape or in Katlehong, then, talk of structural reform, talk of, budget balances, talk of bringing our debt down is meaningless to people. That is not what's going to feed them and address their crisis. So, there has to be a combination of interventions, job promoting, public and private sector interventions, which take a bit of time to roll out. The fantastic thing about the grants and a basic income grant is it can be rolled out in a very short period of time. And I think we have to acknowledge that the Department of Social Development has done fantastically to roll out 9.5 million special COVID grants in a very short space of time, despite the problems that are there. And there are many problems that need to be addressed. And that's precisely what civil society wants to engage with government on. How do we improve the grants? How do we change the conditionalities? How do we improve the level? But we are simply not in that conversation.
And you mentioned, Neil, pardon me, the Social Development Minister. She at least appears to be one of the people in Cabinet who are keen for this sort of intervention, even though, she's not, I don't think she stated it explicitly, but I recall she was also talking about perhaps an increase in taxation for the rich to help more of the poor. How much support do you think this has in Cabinet, or how much support do you think it'll need to come to fruition?
Look, our sense is that in principle, the president himself is very supportive of this. That, as you say, the Social Development Minister is supportive of this, but there's just gridlock in government. And one of the problems that we experience is that National Treasury acts as a super department, and in essence, it's vetoing and blocking constantly because it holds the purse strings. And it's not the role of National Treasury to make policy on things like social development. That's the role of Department of Social Development together with the rest of government. But government as a collective has to step up now. You know, it's not good enough to say the Treasury is blocking. Government has responsibility to take the decisions that need to be taken. And, you know, we hope the President is going to do that.
Neil Coleman, good to speak to you once again, and hopefully the next time we chat it'll be a different conversation that perhaps has moved forward a bit. Neil is with the Institute for Economic Justice, speaking to us about these calls for a basic income grant, a permanent basic income grant for the poorest among South African society.